This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hello and welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. Covering Apocrypha, the 16th episode of the third season. I'm Darren Mooney, I'm filling in for Tony Black, and joining me again is Christopher Irish. How are you, Chris?
Very good. Nice to be here again.
It is indeed. It feels like it was only yesterday that we were talking. But yeah, so we're talking about the second part of the third, or basically the second mythology two-parter, as long as you don't count the 3 episodes that bridge the second and third season, which is Apocrypha, which basically picks up on the threads from last week's episode. It follows the first encounter that Mulder and Scully have with the black oil. At this point, Krychek has been infected with the black oil. Mulder is traveling with him back to the United States, while Scully is also trying to reignite interest in the death, the case investigating the murder of her sister, while also trying to investigate the shooting of Assistant Director Skinner. So there's a lot happening here, and we'll sort of jump right in. But first of all, Chris, if you were to rate Apocrypha out of 10, what would you rate it?
I'd probably give it about the same as the last one, like 5 or a 6.
Yeah, perfect. I would probably go for about a 6 or a 7 myself, actually, I have to admit. It's a pretty solid two-parter, I think, as far as two-parters go. It's like it's not as good as the one that bridges the second and third season for me, and I actually have a huge soft spot for Nicene 731, whereas Piper Maru and Apocrypha are they're good. They don't really click for me in the way that the others do, I think.
Yeah, it seems like the storylines were not quite as gelled together. Like, it kind of bounced. I mean, obviously you have Mulder bounced across the globe in a very short seeming amount of time.
Yeah, it is the international jet-setting Mulder, everywhere from like North Dakota to Hong Kong, while following this sort of single thread. But it's and to New York as well and back. It is very much all over the globe. It is a very kind of adventurous globe-trotting episode. And I wonder, actually, part of me wonders if this is, because we talked a little bit in the last episode about how like the X-Files sort of reflected contemporary anxieties and contemporary uncertainties and stuff like that, and about how like the black oil was, it was like Carter's idea of evil as something that infects and corrupts us, as seen in episodes like Grotesque and Empedocles. But it's also, maybe a metaphor for like AIDS or Ebola, which were very much topical concerns at the time. And I wonder, like, watching the third season, where you have a lot of emphasis on, like, international conspiracies, where you have, like, obviously at the end of the second season, you have that great sequence where there's this chain of phone calls through the various, like, Axis countries, where it's, like, Japan calling Germany, calling Italy, calling the cigarette-smoking man, in this sort of game of telephone. But you have also, like, in, obviously, Nicene 731, you have this idea that the Japanese have been, like, conducting their own sort of secret conspiracy involving this, like, alien plot that's taking place. And even in, like, Piper Maru and Apocrypha, you have this sort of weird sense the French are doing their own thing as well. Like, there's a syndicate, there's a moment with the syndicate in Apocrypha where the well-manicured man is like, well, how the hell did the French find out this was happening?
They just kind of pop in, like, I think it really comments on the whole global aspect of society. Like, back then, that's kind of when the internet was kicking off, so the world was a lot smaller, but, like, you were also nervous about what other nations were doing. Like, politicians are still clearly worried about that.
You have this sort of like, it's easier to get around, or at least in the 90s, after the end, because during the Cold War, you obviously had this big divide between us and them, and you had this sort of like idea of dividing the world between two poles. Whereas, like, in the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, like, it seemed almost like international barriers had collapsed. You're quite right that, like, Mulder travels a lot in this two-parter. Like, he hops on planes. He's flying, even within the United States, he's flying between, like, Dakota and New York and Washington. But he's also flying over to Hong Kong as if it's no big deal as well, and hopping on a flight back. It hints at this idea that, like, borders and barriers and boundaries that used to exist don't really exist anymore. And it's something that the X-Files sort of touches on repeatedly. Like you have like those really awkward subculture episodes, and when I say that, people know immediately what I'm talking about. It's episodes like Teza dos Bichos, the infamous awful one, or Telico, or like El Mundo Giro. The idea of like this idea of a shrinking world where you have these subcultures that exist within the borders of America or whatever. But you also have this sense that like national identity is breaking down as well, and like this sense of like even within this episode, even within Apocrypha and Piper Maru, there's this interesting sort of anxiety that the X-Files feels about stuff like, kind of conformity and the idea of like fitting in and blending in. There's a moment where Scully goes to visit Captain Johansson in Piper Maru, and you get that wonderful establishing shot of like the base where all the houses have been built according to specifications. It looks like suburbia. It looks like somebody's copied and pasted the same house over and over again. And even at the end of Apocrypha, you have like this really almost ironic mirroring of that, where you have Mulder and Scully going to North Dakota, and you just have this like smattering of like silos, old missile silos scattered across the landscape. And Scully's like, there must be 200 missile silos here, and it's like they're all identical and sort of indistinct, and it's impossible to know which is which because everything is now mass produced and everything is on such a large scale that it's possible to get lost. And it's kind of interesting to see the X-Files dealing with this idea of like globalization and mass production, and the idea that the world is like at once infinitely large and vast and impossible to find what you're looking for in, but also paradoxically at the same time you can hop on a plane and travel around the world in the space of 13 hours and hop back as if nothing's happening, and like what that means for us as a society. And it has, like, I think you were right, I think last week you mentioned like the X-Files has aged remarkably well with stuff like this, and I think like even that sort of anxiety about globalization is something that's very relevant at the moment.
Yeah, it's still, I mean, even like I was saying back in the 90s when it was just kind of cresting into that kind of worldview, it's really like, it's a double-edged sword, especially in the X-Files episodes. Like if you're not trying to impart what we're dealing with as a nation and a culture, it's just the way the world was, like you were saying, how it's very uniform, and there's a separation between countries, but now that the world is kind of meshing together, it's clearly making it more dangerous for humanity in general for the X-Files purposes, because the more connective they are, like when the oil, it took it 50 years to get from the bottom of the ocean up to the surface, and from then it took a couple days to get where it was going.
To get from like the Pacific Ocean to Hong Kong to the silo in North Dakota, like everything is so much more connected, and it's interesting because it reminds me of like that viral metaphor. It's like that wonderful the idea like the virus infecting the human body, where it infects a cell and then that cell spreads and it's all connected. And it's almost like that, but on a social level, where like the black oil hops from one cell to another, except instead of hopping from one cell like a virus does, it hops from one person. And instead of moving from one part of the body, it moves from one part of the globe to another. It's a nice little sort of metaphor. It reminds me of, have you seen is it Rise of the Planet of the Apes?
Yeah, I think I have seen that.
Yeah, at the end of the credits, they do this sequence where they follow the spread of the virus through like plane flights over the closing credits, where you have like the basically the lines going from one city to another, and then 5 lines come out and they go somewhere else. It basically shows how this like virus spreads from like one pilot all the way across to decimating mankind. And it's sort of like, it feels like the X-Files is sort of doing something like that in the context of the 90s, where you have everything very close together and everything very integrated, and like whether or not that's something that makes us anxious, it makes us sort of nervous a little bit, I think, which is, it's kind of again the roots of great horror.
The social commentary is pretty spot on.
But anyway, so we'll jump into talking about the episode itself, because it opens with like a lot of the X-Files two-parters, it doesn't jump directly back into the action, the cliffhanger from the last episode. It actually has a nice little, the teaser to the second part serves as a sort of an interlude, where it's like August in 1953, where a sailor from the Zeus Faber is basically telling his story, one of the survivors. And you have this sort of interesting sort of conversation. And sort of, we talked about it a little bit last week when we were talking about like the living memory and the idea of like what happens when the last person who remembers something dies, and how the X-Files is about memory and how it feels sort of anxious about that. Because you have a line from the sort of survivor where he's talking to the people who are taking a statement. He's like, I'm the last man who knows what killed those men aboard that submarine. And, you know, Bill Mulder, who is listening to this story, says that, you know, we are here to hear your story and to see that justice is served. And, you know, that's ironic because the audience knows that the cigarette smoking man and Bill Mulder won't actually do that. But it does suggest that there's some power in bearing witness to what happened and to recording, like, historical injustice. And in the context of the 90s, it's worth noting that, like, this would have been around the time that, say, Schindler's List would have been released, for example, that you would have had like Steven Spielberg doing this project to record the testimony of like Holocaust survivors, because people were sort of wary of the fact that at this point people who had survived the Second World War were obviously in their 70s and 80s, but they were passing away. And so like people no longer had that direct tether to history. So you have that question of who remembers this? I mean, I think there's a line in, it might be The Blessing Way, or it might also be Paperclip, where I think Albert says, you know, a memory survives only as long as the last person who remembers it. And there's a sort of a, like, in the 90s, you were looking at people who had lived through the Second World War, which was this hugely influential thing, I think, for, like, the world as a whole, because the Second World War is what defines the world that we now live in. It's the moment where the United States became the dominant global power, where Britain sort of became this background player a little bit, where Europe, you know, sort of realized that we have to come together, like, as more than one nation. We have to never let this happen again. It defined the political order. You had, like, the ceding of the colonies in, like, the Far East and the Middle East, the surrendering of power to local governments. And the Second World War sort of, like, in many ways kind of defined the global order as we understand it today. And there's a question watching the X-Files of, like, the people who helped establish that global order and who helped build the world that we're living in now, they're all dying at this point in the third season, 50 years on from the end of the Second World War. So how do we properly remember that? How do we properly come to terms with what our parents and what our fathers in particular sort of experience as part of that? And it's interesting to see the show sort of literalize that in a way.
Yeah, and I like how it kind of parallels not only the real life story of how the nation's changed from World War II, but clearly Chris Carter took inspiration from that, because the mythology arc with the oil, especially, it starts at the same time. So you're seeing, like, there's a lot of parallels between how the nations evolved and progressed, and then how the black oil evolved and progressed, and you have the syndicate and a cigarette smoking man. So it's really interesting.
It does indeed. I mean, like, you know, throughout the mythology, there's obviously, it's sort of tethered to, you know, the crash in Roswell, New Mexico, although the cigarette smoking man says that wasn't really what happened. It was another crash around the same time, because the mythology isn't complicated enough. But it's very much like it's the end of the Second World War, and you see that in, like, obviously My Struggle 1, but you see it in, like, Travelers as well. There's a sense that, like, what the syndicate is in the X-Files really began to take root after the Second World War, and after you had this sort of like process of industrialization taking place. And obviously, like, Paperclip and you know, The Blessing Way make it clear that that's tied to stuff like bringing over the Nazi scientists to help, you know, with the Apollo project to put man on the moon. But I mean, even here, for example, you have this debate about, like, the atomic bomb. Like, the cover story for the submarine that was sent investigating was that it was, like, looking for the third nuclear bomb that was sent to Japan. And, like, the radiation burns as well. It sort of suggests that there's a connection to the world that we're living in now back to, like, the Second World War as a whole. And it's worth noting that I think around the time that this was happening, there was a big, like, culture war debate happening in the States over the Smithsonian's exhibit around the Enola Gay. And, like, the question of, like, how we discuss or how we talk about the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, whether we discuss, like, were they necessary to end the war? were they unnecessary? Were they politically motivated? And sort of this big argument about whether you can have that conversation respectfully with regards to the veterans who obviously gave their lives in protection of the country. And it was this big, like, simmering thing that was happening. And I suspect, looking at the way the third season returns time and again to the Second World War, that it was sort of Carter was dealing with sort of a similar, he was working through sort of this idea, like, metaphorically and allegorically, with this sort of recurring preoccupation with, like, Nazis and the atomic bomb and, like, Japan, which was the other Axis power as well.
Yeah, that comes up a lot too. I remember an episode where old World War II Japanese scientists were experimenting on a extraterrestrial in a train. Oh, I can't remember the episode name though.
Oh, that was Nicene 731. That was the other sort of third season two-parter. And it's actually interesting. One of the things I like about the third season as a whole is that it's a remarkably well-structured season of television, because you have, like, the season seems to fold in on itself. It sort of has this. It opens with 2 mythology episodes, which are like The Blessing Way and Paperclip, and it closes with 2 which are like Wet Wired and Talitha Kumi. But it has also these 2-parters in the middle of the season, which are like 8 episodes apart and 4 episodes from the middle, which sort of reflect one another, because they both. You're right that they both deal with the legacy of the Second World War. In Nicene 731, it's the same, like, Japanese scientists who were conducting experiments on, like, prisoners during the Second World War who are doing this right now, basically, or who are their descendants, or their information or research is being used. And here it's like the guys that we sent to pick up, that we said we sent to pick up the atomic bomb, were also sort of complicit in this thing that was happening. So you have this nice little mirroring and symmetry that runs the season, which is remarkably well structured for, like, back at a time. We talked about last week, like, the idea of serialization and continuity, but back when television wasn't really doing this sort of intricate structuring, it's really nice to see that in the third season as a whole. Yeah, and I also like how, I know in America particularly, we have a problem with looking back at our past and kind of glossing over things as a society. I mean, it's a pretty common problem these days, but where you have this romanticized view of what things were like, but when you actually dig into it, like with the Enola Gay story, or even in this episode of The X-Files, they have people dying in a submarine because of a bad military judge. But like we keep bringing up, it's how the past comes up and how you deal with it. But there's always that question, like, is this the right thing to do or not? I mean, clearly the syndicate and people like that are always trying to steer it to their narrative. So it's really interesting how that plans out. Cool. All right, so we jump then from that teaser back to the present day. We have Mulder and Krycek, who are basically, Mulder, they've managed to get into the country, they're driving along, and then they're ambushed, they're sort of run off the road in one of those great sort of X-Files conspiracy thriller narrative sequences. There are lights on the road, there are swerving cars, there are men with guns, there's like no clear jurisdiction going on, but it doesn't really matter because they've got guns and they're taking what they want. But you have this sort of like, this wonderful moment where they seem to capture Krycek, but Krycek then uses this sort of lightning flash, this radiation flash, which is something that the Black Oil doesn't really do that frequently between now and I think it is the 8th season. The episode is a Viennan where it does it again, but it's a nice little sort of connection it gives you sort of between the atomic bomb and the Black Oil, where it has the power to send this radiation. And I think Scully at one point even compares it to like the power of a nuclear bomb.
That's true, and also I think they did it in the last episode. That was when Krycek and Mulder were confronting each other, and Geraldine got shot, and then the Frenchman's wife shows up and zaps all these a group of heavily armed agents. It's like, nope, you're not going.
This is what true power looks like, which is nice, because you get that sense in the third season, like that as dangerous as the government is, like as powerful as these forces are at work in the government, and how easily as they could crush like Mulder and Scully and shoot Skinner in a restaurant. There's a sense that there are forces at work that like make them seem completely useless, which is fascinating, and it's also kind of terrifying as well.
Yeah, and it's also really kind of scary how Smoking Man handles it when he tells people, like, yeah, just get rid of those bodies, they're done. And they're still sitting there breathing.
It's like, yeah, that's the prognosis, isn't it? I think it's the line as well. It's a great Smoking Man moment. It's a wonderful sort of like illustration of how little he actually cares about people. And then while that's happening, basically, so Mulder, wakes up in a hospital. Scully tells Mulder that Skinner is also in a hospital because he's just been shot. But also that she's managed to identify that Skinner's shooter is Cardinal. She doesn't know that yet, but it's the same person who shot and killed her sister, which is interesting because it kind of sets up this theme that runs through the two-parter and arguably through the season as a whole, but in these two episodes in particular, which is this idea of like retribution and closure and justice and how we sort of get these things. Because you have, in this two-parter, you have, and we talked a little bit last time about like the splitting up of Mulder and Scully and how they do sort of two separate things where, you know, Scully goes off and she sort of investigates with Johansson and then she gets tied up in the Skinner case, whereas Mulder is off chasing Krycek and then he gets sort of embroiled with the well-manicured man and trying to get the DAT tape, and how there's sort of two different threads sort of within the episode, but they're linked thematically. Because they both find them confronting people who have basically hurt them in the past, who have caused them suffering and pain. Mulder comes face to face with Krycek, the man who killed his father. Scully finds herself tracking down Cardinal, the man who killed her sister. And you have this interesting sort of like parallel between the two stories, because this is the thing when I watch the X-Files that I kind of wonder about, and it comes up in The Blessing Way, when Bill Mulder talks to his son, on the table in that wonderful sort of like Christmas light scene, where they're overlaid sort of over that sort of like starry backdrop. I think maybe it's actually Deep Throat who has that conversation where he talks about how like truth without justice is meaningless, basically. And so you have this idea that it's not enough to simply know the truth, you have to actually find a way to hold the people responsible to account. And in Piper Maru and Apocrypha, you have this interesting sort of challenge about how you hold these people to account. Because like Mulder at several points over the two-parter has Krycek dead to rights. He has a gun pointed at him. And obviously in Apocrypha as well, you have Scully pointing a gun at Cardinal. But there's this discussion that takes place about how killing Krycek and killing Cardinal wouldn't actually represent justice. And there's a nice moment where the well-manicured man, when he meets Mulder later on in sort of New York, is saying, I'm curious, if you've encountered Krycek, why didn't you kill him then? And the question sort of hangs there, and it's like, the answer to that is because killing Krycek there wouldn't be justice, because it wouldn't expose the truth, because it wouldn't reveal what was really happening. It might give Mulder some satisfaction in the moment, but it wouldn't actually accomplish anything or explain what his father died for. And you have that sort of later conversation with Scully when she does manage to track down Cardinal, where she says, I thought when we found him, this man that killed Melissa, that when we brought him to justice, I'd feel some kind of closure. But the truth is that no court, no punishment is ever enough. And it's fascinating to see the show kind of dealing with these big questions. Because those are like philosophy questions as much as like procedural questions.
I don't know if they're quite aware of the syndicate as broad as they are and everything like that's still going to be coming down the pipe later on, but they know there's something bigger at stake, and these two guys that they did catch are just kind of, low-level henchmen, and it took them this long to catch them, so probably not entirely satisfying.
And there is, like, because it happens throughout as well, there's, like, the recurring throughout the show is the question of, like, Mulder looks for the truth all the time. Mulder's searching for the truth. He believes the truth is out there. He believes he can find the truth. And there's this kind of, it's never really articulated, but it's sort of hinted at, which is, like, what will Mulder do when he gets the truth? What happens? What's the end game here? Like, let's say, through some miracle, Mulder has the truth in his hands. What happens then? Like, what's the next step for him? And the show kind of never answers that, but it also acknowledges that that's a fair question that Mulder himself may not know the answer to.
Yeah, I think he toys with that a lot. But I know what his ultimate, like, if he really wants the truth, he's had it at a couple points in the show where he's like, he knew the truth, but he couldn't, prove it. So it's obviously not something that he needs for his own personal gain, so he wants everyone else to realize the truth too, so it's kind of noble in his part. Like, he didn't just see, that's the truth, and moved on to other FBI things.
It's like, okay, whoa, so that's what that was. It's like,
all right, I'm going to go do the fraud unit now. I'm done.
Tell Skinner he doesn't have to worry about getting shot in a diner anymore. But yeah, so basically, so Mulder is sort of pursuing along that line. But you get this really cool sequence where Mulder uses the lone gunman to try and get the DAT tape, which is really nice. It's a really cool sequence because you have them skate. You have it's Lone Gunman on Ice, which is a show that I would absolutely love to see. But you have this, like, it's really well done by Kim Manners, who directs the episode, but you get the three of them sort of like doing like the worst Mission Impossible impression ever. It's like Byers is skating on ice, but he's still wearing his trench coat and it's still closed. Or
Frohickey just as Frohickey.
yeah, it's fantastic. It's like they're the least undercover agents ever, but it's adorable, and it uses them really well. And I think there's a really great moment. I'm not sure if it's Frohickey or if it's Langley, but one of them makes the point that, you should use us more often, Mulder. And there's a sense watching the episode that it's like the writers are going, actually, we really should use these characters more often. Because I think, is this the first time that we really see them in the field?
I think so. Like, you usually just see them in their little dungeon with their computers in the dark room, but this is like when Mulder's like, okay, I'll give you something. Like, we need to do this, and I can't do it alone, so come on, guys.
You get your Junior G-Man badges for the day. But I do, and I wonder if that was like a sort of a stepping stone to like using them later on in, obviously in the 5th season episode Unusual Suspects, and then later on again in Three of a Kind, and then like a springboard to their own show, because this is the point where you realize, actually, watching the lone gunman do stuff is really fun.
Yeah. Like I said in the last one we talked about, like they are kind of a comedic element, but they're not dumbed down. Like they obviously know what they're doing. They just are, figuring it out. Like they're not trained like Mulder, so everything they know they had to glean off the internet or just figure out for themselves. So I always thought that was admirable for them.
And then also, obviously, they try and steal the DAT tape from the locker, but it's not there because Krychek is already, or the black oil in the form of Krychek has already taken it. And he offers it to the smoking man in return or in exchange for the location of the crashed UFO that obviously the alien wants to use to return home, which is interesting as well. It's a nice sort of hook because it gives you, again, we talked a little bit about this last week, but where it ties together a lot of the threads that have been running through the season. So like the DAT tape, disappeared at the end with Krychek at the end of like Paperclip. And it's the kind of thing that like on another show you'd assume would just be forgotten about. But it's kind of nice that they sort of wanted to tie that up and sort of put a bow on it. And so it comes back around to the cigarette smoking man just 8 months or so after he managed to lose it and cause absolute chaos.
I thought it was interesting, too, because when Krychek slaps the tape down at a cigarette smoking man, he was sitting in the dark smoking like he always does, but he's watching a World War II movie. So, like, there's an element of reminiscing for him and nostalgia, too, like the world that was and what he's doing to it.
Yeah. It is, and it ties back into what we were talking earlier about, like, the use of, like, the memory of World War II and stuff. Because the cigarette smoking man, and I think he's doing it as well when Mulder confronts him in One Breath. I think he might also be watching another old black and white film, possibly about the Second World War. But for the cigarette smoking man, he's watching, like, a literal black and white version of the Second World War, where there are neatly delineated heroes and villains. It's the standard narrative. It's not at all messy. There's, in this version of the Second World War that he's watching on television, it's highly unlikely that there are people who are suffering radiation burns or sort of deformities as a result of the dropping of atomic bombs. There's been no moral compromise. No Nazis have been smuggled over to the US in order to help build the Apollo program. None of the research that was, gleaned from experimenting on human people, whether in concentration camps or in like the Asian areas occupied by Japan, has been used or sort of taken or exploited by the Allies because they're the good guys. So it's nice. It's a very clever piece of like simple visual storytelling that tells you a lot, that like the cigarette smoking man, who is the villain of the piece, is watching this sort of very conventional, very sanitized, very how we like to remember the Second World War being version of events, in contrast to what's actually happening around, which is this sort of muddying and sort of exposure and sort of like sort of exploration of what the real legacy of that conflict was, which is very, very good storytelling.
Yeah, I kind of wonder too if he had a level of guilt or some kind of emotion response to that, because he is watching that, and in another episode he's writing fiction stories, and he has this, there's obviously a desire to not be him, but like he's so embroiled in that, this core of this conspiracy, and he knows how rotten everything is. It's just, it ruined him. Like, he might have been a good person at some point, but like this whole thing just crushed him.
He does, yeah, and you're right, when he does like the musings of a cigarette-smoking man in the 4th season, where it's revealed that he's, is it, what, Bloodquirst is the name or something like that? It's got this, Raoul Bloodquirst or something, but like where he's writing these pulpy narratives, there's a sense of like wanting to write his own literal version of history almost, which is kind of very much in fitting with like the show's fascinations and sort of its recurring preoccupations. But yeah, it's a very nice character given moment that he's sitting down, smoking a cigarette, watching a World War II movie, when Krychek strolls in and just sort of puts down the DAT tape. And I like that the cigarette-smoking man doesn't try to strong-arm the creature. He knows exactly... Like, even after the creature's handed him the DAT tape, the cigarette-smoking man is aware of the fact that he has to follow through on his promise to a certain extent. He can't, like, back out on the deal, or he can't try and strong-arm this thing. There's, like, Cardinal is behind the creature with a gun, and he's like, put the gun down. It's like, what are you doing? Yeah, you have no idea. All he has to do is
flash, and we're all, like, everyone's dead.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. But yeah, so you have then basically Mulder manages to get in touch with the well-manicured man.
I thought that was hilarious too. And then, look, there's an indent on this thing. We need to get all this technology stuff and lift the print. And Mulder's just wipes it with a pencil. He's like, there, see.
Yeah, hands it to Froig and says, "Here's your high-tech gadget." It's really great, and it's fantastic as well because it's a very clever bit. It's a nice little joke. It works very well in sort of in the themes of the show as well. It plays well with the lone gunman, and it also gets you that nice scene with like the well manicured man where he answers his manservant. Which is, I love using the word manservant. I don't get to use it often enough. But his manservant answers the phone at the office. And, the well-manicured man has a very polite conversation with Mulder and then, gives the instruction to tell him to meet me, at Central Park or whatever. And he's like, oh, by the way, when you're done, have this line disconnected. So you have this, like, I love the well-manicured man because he has this sort of, like, there's an interesting gulf between, like, who he is in the syndicate, which is like he has to be this sort of ruthless person who is complicit in all these horrible things that have happened. But he's not a dick about it like the smoking man is. Yeah. Like the smoking man is genuinely unpleasant to be around. The well-manicured man seems like he'd probably pay for dinner if you were having dinner with him. He seems like he's a sociable type. He does what he has to do. He's complicit in this horrible thing. He understands that he has to lie, and he's involved in murder, and he's associating with terrible people. But like even here, even before you get like the details about his life that you get like in the 4th season and in the movie in particular, you get a sense of the well-manicured man as somebody who at some stage thought of himself as decent.
I mean, it's obviously this alien invasion is something they can't stop. So I think part of the syndicate is just trying to steer it so it kind of misses society as a whole. Like it's something that kind of unfolds as the show goes on. But that's what I like about the villains in the X-Files too, is like they're not just straight up black and white bad guys. Like you have some moments where even you sympathize with the cigarette smoking man even, but then you have a well-manicured man who, he's not a jerk.
Yeah. And then later on in the 4th season, and I know the 4th season mythology, I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it has some very serious problems with plotting and pacing. But one of the things I really like about it is that you get a sense of like the well-manicured man having a bit of a life outside of the syndicate. And you sort of see him as a human being. And there's like this really clever sense, which I think... And I don't want to talk too much about the later seasons here, but I think the show sort of lost a little bit when it sort of moved past the syndicate as the primary opponents, which is this sense of like the people who do horrible things, it's often the system that sort of does it. It's often like the existing status quo. Bad things happen because we have institutions that are in place, and those institutions are, conditioned to behave in particular ways and to favor particular people. Oftentimes, the people who are responsible for maintaining those institutions, are not the worst people in the world. They're not the literal devil. They're just people who are doing what they believe is right while trying to live their own lives and protect their own interests. And I think that the syndicate, and particularly like in the 3rd and 4th and 5th seasons, I think the X-Files does a good job of like capturing that. We never find out the well-manicured man's name, but he feels like a person, if that makes sense.
Yeah. They just don't make him dumb filler character. They actually give him some depth.
Which is great. So the well-manicured man and Mulder have a meeting in which the well-manicured man basically delivers a bunch of exposition which confirms pretty much everything that Mulder had already done. And there's a really great moment where the well-manicured man's like, I've given you all of this. Don't you have anything for me in return? And Mulder's like, actually, all you did was just say all the stuff I was thinking out loud. Which is very rude, Mulder. But it's entirely fair. And the well-manicured man sort of draws Mulder's attention to the fact that anyone can be gotten to, which sort of twigs him to the fact that Skinner is possibly still a target. So Scully goes to check in on Skinner. She discovers that he's being moved. She manages to intercept the ambulance. She hops in the back of the ambulance. Cardinal attacks the ambulance, which leads to one of those nice sort of action set pieces that the show does very well, and did very well even at the time when it didn't have a huge cinematic budget, where you have this sort of, he attempts to break into the ambulance, Scully forces him down, and she sort of chases him and sort of gets him down in an alleyway, and then sort of has this moment where she almost considers shooting him. And it's a really great scene for Anderson. Anderson is always great, but there's this really tense moment between the two of them where she's confronting this person who killed her sister, and you can tell that there's this sort of urge to want to kill him, to want to pull the trigger. But she doesn't, which is remarkable.
Like, she's a very morally grounded character, but, you know, everyone has their conflicts, but it's just watching her work through it, even in that kind of a short burst of action. It's really great how Gillian Anderson portrayed that and how Scully is as a character. But, like, you didn't really see a lot of that in the mid to early 90s, like these, you know, kick-butt women that can do stuff, and she didn't need Mulder to show up and catch the guy. So, like, no, I can do this.
Yeah, I'm perfectly on top of this. You continue your wild goose chase, your nice meeting in Central Park with the guy who's telling you everything you already know anyway. I'll take care of the real business here, if you don't mind. But yeah, they have this. Then obviously Mulder basically goes on a trip. They go to North Dakota, where they go and investigate the silo, which is where the ship is being held. The smoking man has moved the ship in order to make it more convenient for the creature to escape. And I actually love, you've got this wonderful sense of tension within the Syndicate where, and it's very clear obviously from back, you know, early in the third season with episodes like The Blessing Way and Paperclip, that like the cigarette smoking man is following his own agenda as much as he's following the agenda of the Syndicate. So he's very clearly, he's moving the ship in order to, like, appease the alien, because the alien's going to give him the DAT tape back. Which is grand, because he's already told the Syndicate back in Paperclip that he blew up the DAT tape. That there's no copy of it in existence. So he's covering his own ass. But you have this wonderful bit where he's explaining that he's moving the ship not because he's going to surrender it to an alien intelligence, but because, you know, he's worried that the French might try and steal it, which is it's a wonderful sort of character beat. I do wonder how he explains it when the ship presumably takes off and disappears into the night. He's like, maybe it was the French, I don't know. But it does, it leads this wonderful, and it's interesting because I think this is like a really good iconic mythology sort of episode of the X-Files where, and we talked about, like, I think neither of us think this is our favourite mythology episode, but it has a lot of stuff in it that we associate with the mythology. So obviously the black oil and stuff, but I also think of like the silo sequences in the episode as being like archetypal sort of X-Files stuff. It's Mulder and Scully running through like dark concrete military corridors where everything looks vaguely the same, and there's a hint that like behind these doors that were built by the military-industrial complex, there are all these dark secrets that are waiting to be broken out if they can just figure out which doors to look behind. It's a really, really great sequence.
Yeah, and I mean, even back when the cigarette smoking man was talking to the Syndicate, they asked him, like, why didn't you just put it in Nevada with the other Roswell one? And there he's gave him some half-cocked reason for it, but like obviously the Syndicate doesn't know everything, and he's clearly trying to steer them too. It's like the whole thing's such a mess.
I love that line about Area, because it's very clearly Area 51 that they're talking about in Nevada. I like that his response to that is that, like, basically, well, Area 51 is like everybody knows about Area 51 now. It's not cool. It's like, you know, that's where all the uncool alien spaceships go. It's like, you know, because the press know about it, the conspiracy people know about it. It's like, if you really want to hide an alien spacecraft, trust me, North Dakota is where you want to be.
Yeah, no one wants to go to North Dakota. Sorry if you're from North Dakota.
All I know about North Dakota, I learned from, is it Fargo, the TV show, I think, has like several episodes and sort of arcs set in North Dakota. So that's all I know about the region. I know that it snows a lot. That's all that I know about it. But yeah, so basically they go into the silo and they pry around, they investigate, but they get caught. This is one of those great, like, really kind of frustrating X-Files moments, where it's like Mulder and Scully are so close to the truth, or so close to, like, having something, because the audience knows that the ship is physically there, and they know that Krychek is also physically there, so they know that, like, what Mulder and Scully want is, like, within arm's reach. But at the end of the episode, the military swoop in, arrest them, and basically take them off site. And it's one of those moments which I think maybe the show overplayed as it went on. You'd have a lot of moments where Mulder and Scully are like this close to getting to the truth, only to be like arrested and released at the end of it, and don't manage to have what they're trying to get. But I think that at this point in the show, it's still fresh enough that it feels like a satisfying conclusion in some ways.
Yeah, and it is such a perfect X-Files shot with the flashlights and the darkness. Like, it's just really moody and creepy. I also enjoyed the room where Krychek was in was room 1013, which is the production company. I was like, oh, nice.
Yeah, Mulder and Scully should make a note of how often that number pops up, and just be like, if we see that number like randomly written down, we should probably check that item first. And then you get that wonderful sort of like, okay, well, first of all, you get that sequence of Krychek vomiting up the black oil, which is like this wonderful sort of horrific sequence. I think that the actor Nick Lee, who played Krychek, has talked about like that being a horrific experience shooting that scene.
I remember watching it when I was a kid, and I just was so grossed out just by hurling all this black oil. I'm like, oh my god.
And it's the consistency of the thing as well, because it looks like it's not just liquid; it's like little lumps of stuff as well in there. Cause I think Mulder describes it as a medium for whatever it is that's moving through it, which is quite interesting. Because, I mean, later on it's implied that, like, the black oil is, like, the alien creature's natural form. Whereas I think in Apocrypha, it's actually meant to be the diesel oil from the crashed plane. But it's still, like, even then there's a sense that there is something in the oil. It's sort of almost like Lovecraftian. It's like you can't imagine what this alien thing is. It's actually so disgusting and so horrific that you can't actually see it. All you see is just the oil and the slime that it leaves behind, which is like almost it's first of all, as we pointed out, there's a lot of really effective sort of, we're doing this on a budget, on a television budget sort of storytelling here, but it's very effective because it's really unsettling. What you don't see is sometimes more horrific than what you do.
No, completely. Like, they could have, if they had money, just made some weird aliens-looking creature, but I don't think it would have been as effective. Like, just the creepiness of the oil, like, it's not a substance you're not used to seeing in real life, so, like, you come across it, and if you're an X-Files fan, like, ugh.
Yeah. I think you're right, because, I mean, later on they do try and do an alien-type creature, but it's telling that that alien-type creature is nowhere near as iconic as the black oil. When people think of the X-Files, they think about, like, the bees, they think about, the triangular spacecraft, but they also think about the black oil, because the black oil is such a great, you're right, it's a great visual.
It's easy to convey, and it sticks with you, and it's just disgusting watching it pour out of Krychek.
So, yeah, just sort of like keep going, and little strings of it as well, which somehow makes it ickier. Like, it would be one thing if it were just a blob and it was out, but it's like, no, there are probably still little bits of that still inside of him. And it's like, ugh. But it is.
Not only that, but he's locked in the silo for God knows how long, because no one's coming for him. Nobody cares about Krychek.
Again, poor rat boy, the universe's whipping boy. And I like that because it's got that sort of like wonderful, almost like gothic horror quality to it. Like, if the black oil is like this Lovecraftian kind of horror that you can't quite wrap your head around, like the fate of Krychek is like this Edgar Allan Poe gothic horror nonsense, like walled up inside a tomb. It's all these derelict sort of missile silos that, as Scully pointed out, nobody's using them anymore, so nobody has any reason to go there. And Krychek, who's been like taken there by this hostile entity, which has then abandoned him, ditched him, climbed inside its ship, and presumably flown away to God knows where. It's just like, yeah, thanks for the ride, buddy. I'll see you around sometime. And Krychek is just left in this big empty space with just himself. And it's horrific and haunting. And it's kind of poetic because, like, Scully was talking about how no court or no justice will be enough in order to pay back what's been taken from her. But at the same time, it sort of feels like... And then this is the thing with the X-Files, because the X-Files, as dark as it is, it has this weird, almost like humanist optimist kind of quality to it, where it almost believes that things will be all right as long as people try to do the right thing. So here there's a sense that, like, Krychek getting stranded with nothing but his own thoughts in the middle of a missile silo in North Dakota is almost like poetic justice for all the horrible things that he's done. It's like the universe has sort of arranged itself so that Krychek, who is this terrible human being, has, like, somehow managed to find justice that no human court could provide. There's something almost comforting in that, I think.
I do kind of feel a little sorry for him just because he is the whipping boy. And, like, I mentioned it before where he has enough luck to be part of the program where he keeps popping up in the conspiracy, but he doesn't have enough luck to save himself from it. So,
Yeah.
if I was Krychek, I'd just say I quit and then live in the hills. Like, just stop trying, dude.
Yeah. It's like get a job, work in an office, get a nice health plan, just sort of settle down.
Or anything else, because you keep doing this and you keep getting buried in silos, getting your arm cut off.
Part of me sort of wonders, is waiting for, like, I was quite disappointed that the show didn't sort of commit to that and have, like, Krychek, like, have you seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
Oh, yeah.
To have Krychek like the Black Knight from that, where it's like every time he appears, something horrific happens to him, and by the end of the series, he's literally the Bionic Man, and because he just won't take a hint.
Yeah, just stop, man. Speaking of Krychek and the guy that shot Skinner, is just I think cigarette smoking man really needs to vet his goons a little better.
It's like, you need to have like a basic aptitude test for this sort of thing.
But they're killing people, but they're never the right person, or they're hitting Skinner but not doing the job.
Yeah, like I feel like your solid work performance this year was like a C+. It's like
you couldn't aim at his face. You're right there.
Yeah, he was right in front of you. He was unarmed. You had a moment. Take a moment. Just like be your Zen self. Speaking of Cardinal, actually, because I like it. There's a really nice touch where it's revealed that he is a graduate of the School of the Americas, which is the training that they provided for like Latin American sort of mercenaries and sort of armed forces, which kind of plays into that whole globalization sort of thing.
Maybe that's where Cigarette Smoking Man found him.
It's like all the good ones are like overseas, actually doing important government work. It's like this guy.
This is the guy that failed. He
yeah, it's like he mostly hits his target. Not always a kill shot, but yeah. Part of me likes to imagine that like it's not even like a syndicate thing. It's just like the cigarette smoking man. It's like he's basically been given a budget for his department, and it's like he's basically decided to cut corners on it. He's like, okay, well look, if I do that, I can also, buy the nice house for myself in the Hamptons if I just hire low-rate goons. And like the well-manicured man sitting there looking at the expenses going, look, you put in for top-of-the-line assassins, and I think you've literally hit none of your targets. And I'm not talking about like, sort of like your goals for the year. I mean actual targets here. Yeah.
I mean, obviously when the syndicate pulled Smoking Man in, they were chewing him out about it too. Like, if this guy gets caught, we're all in trouble, and then he gets caught.
The worst thing that could happen, yeah. It's like, how do you still work here? It's like, well, it's very hard to fire somebody from this syndicate. It's like, you need like an overall majority, and then you have to pay severance. It's really awkward, so I guess we're sort of stuck with him. But, just bear with it. Yeah, there's a lot of really great sort of middle management stuff where you would love to be like a fly on the wall at like syndicate meetings, and not just like the cool syndicate meetings where we see where they're all like, well, you tried to kill him and you failed. It's more like, okay, so like we're organizing a bowling league this time, and we have like the well-manicured man's daughter bakes some cookies so to help raise money for her Girl Scouts, so take what you will, leave $1 in the jar, and we'll sort it all out.
Yeah, maybe his manservant needs a spin-off.
Just sort of dealing with this stuff, and also like picking up dry cleaning. I like that there's something very middle management about the syndicate, because ultimately it's revealed that that's what they are. They are basically middle management for the much bigger sort of threat that's coming, or the more serious sort of players in the game, that they're basically just administrative workers. And there's a real sense watching the show, particularly in the third season, that like this is what these people are. They're middle. That's why they're not especially like ambitious or creative, where they have like they're basically bureaucrats. They have like a set number of like pre-programmed responses to things. I mean, there's a great line from, I think, it's either The Blessing Way or Paperclip, where the well-manicured man's like, basically, is there any problem to which your immediate solution would not be to throw more bullets at it? And you get that real sense with them that they don't really think laterally. They just have a set way of doing things, and that's how things get done.
I think this kind of did highlight that point to Mulder, because when he was talking to the well-manicured man in the park, you could tell Mulder wasn't really that impressed. It's like, I already knew all that. I thought you were supposed to be really connected.
I love the idea that Mulder spent his entire life sort of chasing down this conspiracy, and in the third season he sort of gets a peek at it, and it's really not that impressive.
Like,
it's just
that's
a bunch of guys. Yeah, it's like, you guys aren't even really good at killing people.
Which is kind of terrifying, because they have all this info and they still can't do that much.
I mean, to be honest, I think there is sort of precedent in history, and I think that Carter and his writers are doing this sort of intentionally, and that, like, you hear all these stories, again, like the MK Ultra experiments and stuff like that, where it seems like the people who were doing these horrible things, like, literally weren't doing them competently. Like, it's one thing to be evil and to be competent. It's another thing to be, like, evil and massively incompetent and have people, like, throwing themselves out windows and committing suicide and, like, mixing stuff with drinks because you've got no idea what the effects of it are. And, like, there's a bit of sort of, like, almost truth in television in the way that the Syndicate's portrayed. Because I think that if you look at, like, even, I think... And again, I don't want this to become an overly political podcast, but like you look at things like the current scandal that's taking place in the United States with regards to like certain members of the administration, whether or not they are or not complicit in certain other things that have been happening. And you look at how that unfolds, and it's like when you're organizing a conspiracy, people are terrible at organizing conspiracies. It's like the worst possible chain of decisions executed in the clumsiest manner possible. Like, if they were trying to do this thing that it appears that they might possibly have done, they did it in the worst way imaginable.
The way Chris Carter wrote, I think he really nailed it, because you have that kind of example, but, you know, reality is kind of subjective in these kind of situations where whoever's controlling the Syndicate or anything, like, they can bend the narrative and people are just accepting it. And that's why it's up to people like Mulder who want the truth and they're willing to do the work and dig in. And I mean, obviously it's never the most comfortable choice to make, because they go through some terrible stuff, but I guess it's worth it in the end, because, you know, he just has that drive and desire and ambition.
Don't panic, nothing is wrong with the episode. This is just me, Tony Black, cutting in because I was a bit absent-minded. I forgot to send Darren over the feedback from the X-Files basement group. So I'm going to cut in for a few minutes before we head back to Darren and Chris to wrap things up, to talk about fan feedback from the Xcast podcast listeners, all about Piper Maru and Apocrypha. So let's kick things off with Maciek Gutkowski. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name there, Maciek. But yeah, this he says this two-parter is the beginning of the real rise for the Krycek character as an independent force in the story, and both the writing of the character and Nicholas Lee's acting is superb. I think there's some weight to that, really, you know, in that Krycek really does stand out in this episode as really, you know, emerging fully into the rat boy persona, because we didn't see him much in, you know, Anasazi or The Blessing Way or things like that. So this really sort of sets him out in there, and then gives him that wonderful ending, which, you know, at the time I don't think any of us thought, how the hell is he going to get out of that silo? But you know, he did. Spoilers. Adam Silver, one of our regular patrons, says, I like it how it follows up on both the digital tape Krycek makes off with in Paperclip and the UFO found in Nisei. That continuity really contributes to Season 3 having the best run of mythology episodes. Now, this triggered a little bit of discussion that I was involved in on the basement group about whether it was the same UFO that we saw in Nisei, which I think was called the Talipus. But apparently it was, and we did a little bit of back and forth on it. And Adam says, Mulder makes the connection that the Piper Maru's original position is where the Talipus was when it pulled up the UFO, which is why the Syndicate has the UFO in Piper Maru and Apocrypha. The French found the wreckage of the pilot infected with the black oil, the alien that was aboard this UFO. After it infects Krycek, it exchanges the digital tape to Cigarette Smoking Man for its UFO. So yeah, it does connect, and that was something that hadn't really connected in my head, actually, that Nisei and this episode, in terms of that UFO, because it wasn't really about the UFO in Nisei, was it? That was there, but it was more about the EBE and the train and things like that. So it's clear that like people like Frank Spotnitz and Chris Carter sort of had these two sort of stories in the back of their mind, and that they were both connected. But that's That's interesting. It's something that hadn't really clicked in my head, so it's a good observation there. Sarah Devi-Compt, another one of our illustrious patrons, says, Scully's anger about Melissa is just wonderful to watch. I could only relate to that. If my sister were to be shot, I would want to find justice even though I would not feel peaceful. Something they should have done is follow the path of her grief. Of course, justice won't bring her back. And with the conspiracy, it's hard to find the true justice because so many people are involved. It's not only Krycek and Luis Cardinal, it's all of them at the top of the government. That is what the saddest thing about this is, because even though they arrest the guy who killed her sister, the ones who really killed her will never be arrested. And it's true. This is obviously the good subplot of this two-parter, which is all about Scully's frustration. Maybe we bury the dead alive, with Melissa. So it is true. I think Gillian Anderson does a really good job with her frustrations here and her anger about how she feels about Melissa, and that this is never really going to be wrapped up and given justice as it should be. So no, it is really good. Jeremy Daniels, and one of our patrons, sort of ties into that really. He talks about, I really like the extra thematic layer of conscious being the voices of the dead, in quote marks. It plays really well alongside the Black Oil story and adds some real weight. And that's true, it kind of, it sort of gives it a tether which goes sort of, it has a certain level of allegory and tether beyond, the simple mythology alien aspect of the story. So, yeah, I think he's onto something there. So that's really true. We'll give the last word to the ever insightful and ever incisive Matt Latham when he says, if it was Dave, the Black Oil would have been too scared to even attempt to control a Krycek. So he's calling for a hashtag, what would Dave have done? In the ongoing saga of Dave Krycek, which, we may well, explore one day and take this to its logical conclusion. So, yeah, thank you, everyone who contributed to giving some feedback on what they thought about Piper Maru and Apocrypha as a two-parter. Do keep doing that. Do keep letting us know what you thought about these episodes as we go through them, because it always does add a little bit extra dimension to our episodes. So, yeah, I'm going to zip off now and hand you back to the wonderful hosts, Darren and Chris. So, I'll see you soon, and trust no one.
So I think that about wraps it up. If people are looking for a bit more Chris Irish in their life, where can they find you?
I'm working on the X-Files lexicon. It's both online, and you can search the same name on Facebook, and we have a group there too. It has a nice repository of information, all X-Files related, and we're always expanding and working on projects and doing interviews. Yeah,
you've got some really, really great interviews as well with cast and crew and production people. It's a really useful resource. It really, really is. I'm Darren_Mooney at Twitter. I do various things online. I co-host an Irish film podcast called Scan-On, which releases in theory every Thursday, where we talk about the week in film. So we discuss the new releases, what we watched this week, and the top 10 at the Irish box office. I know that this is a podcast that's aimed at an international audience, but if you want a bit of an Irish flavour to your film discussion, you can search us for Scan-On, which is spelled SCANNAIN, and you can find us on Google that way. But don't worry, next week we'll be back, where myself and Tony will actually be talking about Pusher, which is one of my favourite episodes, and I suspect from my interactions with Tony, just may be one of his favourite episodes ever as well. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. But anyway, join us online. We have the Xcast podcast basement, where members of the group can also talk and discuss the episodes and the show as we rewatch, and just general X-Files related topics as well. Join us next week. But until then, remember, trust no one.
The Xcast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and presented by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated group of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find us on Twitter at the Xcast, and on Facebook if you type in the Xcast, or at our group X-Files Basement, an Xcast podcast fan group, where you can continue the discussion about all things Mulder and Scully. If you want to support the Xcast further, you can now subscribe and become a patron of the show on Patreon. On Google, just type patreon.com/the Xcast. That's Patreon. You'll see all of our tiers, subscription options and perks, which include early access to episodes, bonus content such as commentaries on X-Files episodes, access to a patron chat zone, and even appearing on one of our patron roundtable discussions. We would appreciate any support you can give the show, so just go to patreon.com/thexcast to find out more. Our title music is provided courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.